In an earlier video, we talked about the nature of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four Gospels, and that Matthew, Mark, and Luke were called synoptic, or same sight, same vision, same basic presentation, and John's Gospel was a separate kind of Gospel altogether. So what makes John's Gospel separate? John's Gospel has a number of features that I'd like to highlight right now. The number 7 is played throughout John's Gospel. 7. Now, 7 is what we call a biblical number. Biblical number inasmuch as in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, and in the New Testament, specifically Christian Scriptures, the number 7 is significant for fullness, total, nothing lacking, max. All right? 7, representative of everything, total, full, nothing lacking, all the way to the max. And so in John's Gospel, there are 7 signs that we read about. Now, the word sign could be considered to be the same as a miracle or a wonder working, something that's extraordinary, something that's phenomenally extraordinary, not normal. And John has a specific 7 of these signs that Jesus performs, miracles that Jesus performs. In the other Gospels, they're called miracles or wonders, but signs is the way John uses that particular theme. Now, inasmuch as Jesus told many, many parables and did many, many miracles, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John all record certain of those. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke give many miracles, many signs. John only gives 7. And he's chosen these particular 7 that he talks about as representative of all the rest. What he says at the very end of his gospel is this: there were many other things that Jesus did. If all of them were to be written down, I bet you the entire world could not contain all the books that would have to be written. Now, that's hyperbole, of course. But the idea is that John's chosen these 7 to give us in his gospel as representative of all the rest. And so the number 7. Little spoiler for when we get to the book of Revelation. It's possible that the John who wrote the gospel also had some influence, if not even actually, writing the book of Revelation. And in the book of Revelation, this number 7 plays a lot, as you'll see later on towards the end of this term. I'm not going to go through all of them now because we'll get to that when you actually read the gospel, but the first sign that Jesus performed, was water changed to wine at a wedding in Cana of Galilee. They ran out of wine at the wedding reception. And so Jesus' mom says, take care of it. My time's not yet, says Jesus. So she says to the waiter, do what my son tells you. And so Jesus says, okay, go fill up 7 big jars full of water to the brim. And so they do that. And as soon as the caterer comes and tastes that, he says, that's not water, that's wine. And he goes to the bridegroom and says, you say the very best wine until the very end of this reception when all the other stuff has run out. So Jesus' miracle, his sign, turning water to wine. And it says at the very end of that particular passage, and Jesus performed this sign and his disciples believed in him. So there's something to do with faith in all of these extraordinary miracles. I won't go into the details of all of them, but we have another one, the very 7th one actually, is raising Lazarus from death. Lazarus is in the tomb 3 days. Jesus comes, says, Lazarus, come forth. And out of the tomb hobbles this fellow who's all wrapped up in like mummy clothes, swaddling mummy clothes and a shroud, and he comes to life. He's raised from the dead. So that's the 7th of all of these various signs that Jesus performed. Signs of multiplying bread and fish to feed 5,000 people. 2 pieces of fish, 2 fish actually, and 5 loaves to feed 5,000 people. An individual who was paralyzed from birth, and Jesus helped him to walk. A fellow who was blind, never saw. He was born blind, and Jesus helps him to see. And so those various signs in John's gospel are one of the ways that John has basically taken the chronology and given what happened and give some significance. When you read the chapters that these are contained in, you'll see that it's not just about raising some fellow from the dead or turning water into wine, but that there's a great significance based on much from the Old Testament, all the symbolism, all that goes into that, and John spells it out. Because here's one thing about John's Gospel. As we said earlier in the previous video, all right, that's the 0 point on the timeline. Jesus was born probably about 4 BCE. And it's not until he's about 30, so that'd be about 27, 28 of the Common Era, and then he was crucified at about 30, so he'd be about 33-ish years old. So it was during this particular period of time that Jesus' public ministry was. Okay, so you have this story going on, and then Jesus is crucified, he's executed, and the narrative is that he rose from the dead. And so the very first telling of that story, that he was risen from the dead, Mary Magdalene, by the way, was the very first witness of Jesus when he rose from the dead. She went to the tomb, and she saw him. She found him. And he said, you go tell all of my friends, all of my disciples, all of my apostles that I have risen. And so she was told to go to the other apostles. So she was the first witness. She was the apostle to the apostles. Because remember, in an earlier video, the word apostle means one who's sent. So Jesus said to Mary, you go tell them. So she's the first apostle of the resurrection. So this story, Easter Sunday night, Easter Monday, Easter Tuesday. So they're telling the story. And eventually, this story gets written down about 100 of the Common Era. We're not sure exactly, but let's just say that. So there's about 70 years between the resurrection and the crucifixion and the ascension of Jesus in the gospel narratives and the actual writing this down. So the story didn't drop out of the sky in 100 AD, not at all. The story had been in oral tradition for those 70 years and finally written down in the form we have it in the Bible that you have for this class as the Gospel of John. So all of these miracles, all of the stories about Jesus' life, they didn't drop out of nowhere in 100 AD, 70 years after. It was the oral tradition. Peter has his version of the story, and John records that. James has his version. John himself was one of Jesus' disciples, so he has his own version. So all these oral traditions get written down in about 100 of the Common Era, and we have, therefore, the Gospel of John. I hope that helps unpack some of the nuances and the elements in John's Gospel.